Corey Swanson is a young FBI agent, and in this book, she is pulled into a case where these two young guys who had been out drinking, their vehicle broke down, so they hunkered down in this cave overnight because they didn't have cell service. So in this cave, they found a dead body. So the next morning, when they were able to get back to civilization, I guess, they reported that they found these bodies. So this is how Corey Swanson is pulled into this case. And she brings in a colleague of hers who she's worked with before, Nora Kelly. And she's a forensic archaeologist, I believe that's her title. And so she's brought into the case to evaluate these remains and determine what they are and how old and all that, who they belong to, all that. So when they went back to the site, Nora and Corey, they figured out that it was ancient remains belonging to the Isleta tribe. And so while they're there, Corey wandered further into the cave and she found a body. So based on how this body was dressed, they knew it wasn't ancient remains and unrelated to the original remains that they found. So her and her team, along with Nora, decided to make sure that there aren't any bodies. And what do you know? They found another guy further into into the cave. So now they have two bodies in addition to the original remains that were found. So this is how she's pulled into this Dead Mountain incident. So the Dead Mountain incident is related to 9 engineering students who had gone on a mountaineering trip over 10 years ago into the Manzanos in New Mexico. So they went on this trip and they got caught in a blizzard. And so after they were supposed to return and they didn't, there's a search party that was sent out to find them. So we find out that they had hunkered down in their tent, and for some reason, even though the front of the tent door was open and they were cooking, they slashed the tent and went out the back, which was really strange because why not just go through the front? The other thing that was weird about them is that they weren't properly dressed, even though they had their, clothing readily accessible in the tent. There were different stages of, undress, so to speak, because they weren't dressed for the weather. So as they went through the search, they found a fire site, not a campsite, but like a fire site where they had started a fire. And they found the first group of bodies there, which were four bodies there. And it seemed like they had suffered hypothermia because they weren't dressed properly. They were barely dressed in clothes because they ran out the tent. And, it's possible that they couldn't feel their limbs. And so they got burnt in various parts of the bodies. And they ended up dying out there because they weren't dressed properly. So after they found that set of the students, after a few days, as they continued the search, and because weather restrictions, they ended up finding another 2. And those 2 seem to have suffered a lot of damage to the body, like the way that the person who completed the autopsy described it was as if they were hit by a truck. But there was no reason for them to suffer those type of damages, even though they had fallen. It seemed excessive, and there didn't seem to be any outward signs of trauma per se. So that was really weird. The other thing that was weird was that they had signs of radiation on them. They tested positive for different radioactive products on them. So this was years and years ago. So there were still 3 bodies that were missing. So these 2 bodies that they found were 2 of the 3 that were missing. And so we find out that the first guy who was found, his name was Gordy Wright. And after they did the autopsy on his body, they found out that he had suffered numerous knife slashes to his body, a lot of them, and he had defensive wounds. The other guy who was there, when they flipped him over and they found him and flipped him over, he had a knife stuck into his chest. So it seemed as though he had attacked the other guy and then committed suicide. And it's the, he was still, the way that he died was still holding on to the knife. So it seemed as though he had injured himself, and so he ended up dying. So this second guy was Paul, I believe that was his name, Paul Tallon Jr. And so now they have one guy missing from the group. So while this is happening, there's an incident, conflict, I guess, over the remains, because based on certain guidelines that were around, once they identified that the remains were tribal remains, they should be able to remove that. And so there's this local sheriff, and he's very corrupt. Re-election is coming up, so he's making a stink and being difficult. So this ended up having serious repercussions for Nora and her brother Skip. So Skip ended up being in jail because of these trumped up charges that this sheriff had made up. And so Nora is dealing with that as well. So once they started trying to figure out what happened with these two guys, they also had to look back at the case and to see what could have happened, look at the other people who were on the trip, and to figure out, what connections they had, what could have led to this. Because the first guy, his name was Gold, he did not, in the parents' mind of these guys, done a good job. They were hiding things. They felt like there was a cover up from the government, and they never really got answers, or really any straight answers to what happened to their children. So they had formed initially. They came together as a support group for each other, but they ended up forming the Manzano what did they call it? They formed a nonprofit, and the purpose of the nonprofit was to be able to petition, to be able to fund like additional investigation and all of that. So they formed a nonprofit for those victims of that tragedy. And so the parents of those kids were involved, and they would meet every year, and whenever things came up, they would talk about it. And so this was primarily overseen by Melody O'Connell, who was the stepmom of the guy who was still missing. So they didn't believe the government. And so from time to time, they would start, things would flare up related to the whole incident. All right. So Corey decides that she is going to find out like what really happened with this incident, because based on what they're finding and when she looks back at the case, it's just a lot of unanswered questions in that. So she has a mentor, and his name is Agent Sharp. He is a very unusual individual, but ultimately he has her back. So after they found these two bodies, they decide to investigate this whole Dead Mountain case. And so we find out that there is a lot of things that happened that are suspicious. And it seemed as though maybe there was a deliberate attempt to not really find answers, so to speak, where there were avenues of investigation that could have been pursued that didn't. And so they ended up talking to Gold, and he felt like, he was done wrong in the whole thing. And of course, he's an enemy of the parents and I guess the community, so to speak, because they didn't feel like he did a good job. So Corey ended up talking to a guy named Alex de Gregorio, because that knife that she found in the body had some initials on it. And after she investigated, she found out that those initials didn't belong to anybody in the family. The only person in the expedition who had similar initials, well, he had one initial in common to what was on the knife. And when she contacted the family, no one in the family had such knife or had such initials, so to speak. So she ended up getting some information from the university that they attended, and she ended up talking to this guy, this Alex guy. So he said he knew some of the guys who were on the trip through his roommate, who was Roger O'Connell, and he's the guy who's still outstanding, who's still missing. Now, what's curious is that this guy now, he is a super successful multimillionaire because he had built this bioengineering company and sold it for billions of dollars. And so now he has a foundation that he runs in Malaysia that's supposed to investigate tropical diseases, something like that. So when she contacted him, he said he knew of them, and he made it seem like he didn't really know them that well. And when she first made contact, the secretary had told her that he was in Malaysia. So he decided that he would talk to Agent Swanson, but there wasn't really a whole lot to be gleaned from what he said. But so I thought it was weird that he was the one in connection with those 9 who was super, super successful. So in my mind, I'm thinking like, did he kill them? Did they develop something together? And so he killed them to get them out the way so he would get all the credit. And then from that, he built this super successful company. That's what I was thinking in my head. So, okay, so after she talked to him, she got some information, but nothing really that would help the investigation, but just confirming that who the knife belonged to. And the knife belonged to this other guy who was his roommate. That belonged to his roommate. And she tracked down the roommate and talked to the roommate. And so she was able to confirm the knife. He never lent the knife to anyone. So it seemed as though the knife was stolen somehow or got lost. He said he lost track of the knife. He thought he had lost it. But he never lent it out because it had sentimental value because it was given to him by his dad. So now we're able to confirm who the knife belongs to. So now where the expedition was taking place, it was those mountains where they went was close by to this Air Force base. So I can see now as we progress through the book why the parents thought there was some government conspiracy, because what do you know? There's an Air Force base nearby, and they were in the vicinity of land that's bordering the Air Force, and the fact that the investigation seems so inept. So they during the investigation found some information or a connection to one of the victims that connected that guy to the Air Force base. So Corey decides she needed to talk to some folks at the Air Force base. And then when she did, what do you know? The investigation got shut down. She was told that she cannot pursue this line of inquiry. She cannot involve the Air Force. So, of course, she cannot close the case because she doesn't really know what really happened. And of course, her superiors are telling her like, well, we did find the body, we were able to identify and all that. She should be happy with that. But of course she wasn't. So she had gone and talked to this lady whose name was Gwen, and apparently she was dating the guy who's missing, Rodney O'Connell. So she got some information from this lady she disclosed to her, and after this happened where her investigation was shut down, she decides that she is going to go to the Air Force base because she was told that there was a bunker there, and based on the direction that the hikers were going, she felt like they might have been going to the bunker, and that last body that was missing could potentially be there. So she decides her and Nora, she pulled in Nora when she told Nora her intentions anyway of going there. Nora's like, you cannot go by yourself. You don't have the experience. You don't have the equipment and all that. So Nora decides to go with her. And what do you know? This is when things really kick off because she's getting close to discovering what really went down. And kind of, I guess I kind of was leaning in the right direction that something wasn't quite right about this De Gregorio guy. And so in the end of the book, we found out that he had something to do with what happened. Not what I thought, but something. And so at the end of the book, there was a huge showdown between Corey and Corey and Nora, and of course the bad guy, and at the 11th hour, they were able to get reinforcement and all that. And ultimately, she was able to figure out what really happened to all the victims of this hiking trip. And she was able to find that last hiker who was missing. Although she did all that, the parents still felt like there was more to the story, that there's still a cover up, which is kind of they just didn't want to let this conspiracy theory go. But anyway, I did enjoy this book. I tend to like thrillers that are not the normal, I guess uh, murder investigation where it's like, okay, this person killed somebody, let's find out who it is and all that. This had a little bit more to it because it had some scientific stuff, learned about, I guess I learned a little bit about some tribal affairs because that was kind of intertwined in the story. Weather related stuff as they going through the investigation, hiking, avalanches. There's a whole lot of different things melded into this storyline, which I really enjoyed. So for this one, I would rate this a 4.5. It was very intriguing storyline. There's a lot going on, and yeah, those are my thoughts on the book. So if you have read or listened to this book, let me know your thoughts. Until next time.